back again. After talking, the next I picked up this Beast by Foucault. It's called The History of Sexuality, Volume 1 by Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, and so if I look down, I'm looking at my notes, and that's why I'm not making eye contact, because I don't know how to do the scripting. So I was introduced to Foucault through Madness and Civilization in my undergrad class. So and it's been a long time that I've picked him up or anything by Foucault for that matter. I've always found him fascinating as a philosopher in the sense that he has been easier to read than, let's say, I don't know, Derrida or Lacan. And I've always found him fascinating because he gives these critical frameworks, these structures, and these tools to examine how knowledge and power come together, exercise in each other. And his first volume on history of sexuality has analyzed repression of sex through these frameworks. And growing up, I know I have always understood sex in binaries of repression and liberation, or that it has been a linear path that is moving towards, or simplistically put, it is supposed to be this linear path towards emancipation or liberation. Of course, like the conservatives or prudes or whatever you might call them will think differently, and but the general consensus is toward the liberation of sex. But Foucault's premise throughout the book is questioning the discourse on repression itself. How did this come about? How did this come about to exist? And because this discourse claims to be critical in nature, right? And he's questioning: is it actually a rupture between a puritanical past and a prospective liberated future, or is it the part of the same power structure it claims to dismantle? So, for which it is not um, enough to know. So, and that's the reason why it's not enough to know what is the discourse around sex, but also to know who is making it and what is not being said, who is it being said to, who is being kept out of it, and in what spaces it is being talked about. So this is what I understood. Foucault starts from the beginning, from the Victorian regime, and to see what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, and who allowed it. So the bourgeois society of the Victorian regime allowed the existence of deviant um, sexualities only if they were pushed away in the corner. And the corners being your brothels, your mental hospitals, and they were like, fine, like if you want to be deviant, like if you want to do something else other than reproduction, then you can exist. But we'll give you a separate place to exist, and that's why asylums, brothels, etc. But they're not being generous. They're not being like okay, like you know, we'll give you your own place. That's not what's happening. And it is not out of like this frustrated resignation, you know, like when you were little and your parents would be like okay, fine, like just take it, like just do it. But the motive was to also make profit off of them. So to think of it, and these mental hospitals, brothels, they are profit making places, and well, like who's making that profit is a different question altogether. For the other population, meaning the well-adjusted individuals of the society, it won't mean pleasure at the cost of work. So if you're thinking about sex, if you're talking about it, then it comes at the cost of your work time. It comes at the cost of your work time. And we believe it promises something, and repression has always been the center of discourse. And we believe it promises something even bigger, bigger than liberation, and hence, even its repression is being talked about so passionately in the hopes of overcoming it in the future, because we believe it has something bigger to provide us. And this is the beginning of Foucault's repressive hypothesis. And so the repression of sex began strongly with the onset of 17th century bourgeois society, and it entered through Catholicism the concept of confession. And everything about sex means something and needs to be confessed in detail. So our desires, you see, are discourses. They're ready to be analyzed, to be studied. And one of the examples he gives of sex being pushed into utilitarian rational discourses is this concept of census, data population. So social, sexual conduct becomes a social or political behavior, and hence it needs to be administered. And Allah is going deeper beyond the binaries of what is said versus what is not said, but also the way in which something is said or not said. So basically, how is the state or masters of discourse authorizing or imposing discretion? And one of the reasons it needs to be administered is to control all those sexual pleasures that do not lead to reproduction. And one of the things that pinched me potentially was a misguided use, I think it was misguided use of one of the examples of sexual assault that is utilized to make larger arguments to prove how sex was confined to medicine, law, psychiatry, etc. And I'm not sure if I'm misreading it. I'm missing something here. So if you are if you are the master of the text, let me know. So I don't know, like I can read it out. Saying, what is the significant thing about the story? The pettiness of it all. The fact that this everyday occurrence in the life of village sexuality, these inconsequential bucolic pleasures, could become from a certain time the object not only of a collective intolerance but of a judicial action, a medical intervention, a careful clinical examination, and an entire theoretical elaboration. So, yeah, I don't know if the example is misplaced. Moving on, um, when sex came under the radar of science, it was talking about it, but it was only talking about its pathologies. This is what he calls scientia sexualis, sex as medicine, law, mental illness. And then we became a confession-centric society. We are I mean, to think of it, like you're always talking about it, like you're always confessing, like, oh, what is your fantasy, what are your desires, and you're talking about this to the state, you're talking about to your parents, to your educators, to the doctors. So he's questioning, how did we become this confession-centric society? And the truth confessed, by nature, it's not free. Just because you talk about it does not mean that it will lead you to the path of sexual liberation. And it's not liberating, as it is infused with relations of power. And the bourgeois society produced mechanisms to compel everyone to speak of sex in terms of confessions, as if trying to extract a hidden secret of sex. This knowledge was primarily built upon, and he explains these are four domains: a hysterization of women's bodies, so where the female body is hyperanalyzed, approved, disapproved, heavily scrutinized, and then it's looked at as something which is brimming with sexuality, saturated with sexuality, or a pedagogized, I don't know how to pronounce it, pedagogization of children's sex, meaning children are dangerous sexual beings and then they need interventions of adults. So it is being taught to children, or talked about sex to children, to calm the adult anxieties, and not really out of the intent of harm reduction or harm prevention. um, a socialization of procreative behavior, so making the couple is a social body and that has to reproduce or control reproduction. So anything which does not lead to that social body and ultimately reproduction is going to be useless. And a psychiatrization of perverse pleasure, so medicalization of all considered sexual anomalies, and then seeking appropriate courses for these deviations. The intent of this alliance, and alliance is anything that has historically regulated sexualities. So it could be the law, the family structure, the state. So the intent is not to make these deviant sexualities hidden, or to invisibilize, to make them invisible. It is to make, but to make the standard of sex. So sex here is not just the act of intercourse, but it's a composition of everything related to the concept of sex. So gender identities, intercourse, desire, law that governs, law that governs that law that governs sexualities and sex, reproduction. It's a unity of what has been used as a natural or a biological truth in the past. So, and it is through this anchor that the alliance has been able to formulate laws that control bodies, while viewing it as an optimization of life. So, as in a productive sexual life is that which offers itself to reproduction ultimately. This, and for many other reasons, the concept of desire is not as innocent as it seems to be, and is rooted in class or caste hierarchies. So these hierarchies do determine who and what we desire or not. And then, so when he's questioning the taboo of incest, he's not propagating incest, but instead he's saying, how did we as a bourgeois society come to form the alliance system that will create a universal law wherein only a certain order of sexuality is permitted? So when he's interrogating the taboo of any kind, he's asking a structural question, not a moralistic one, because Foucault's not interested in morals here, and wherein a social order of who can have sexual relations with whom is hierarchized as a class system. So what we desire can reveal our proximity to these class structures, because desire is so embedded in hierarchy. So a desire does not come out of a vacuum. And this is why it's important to have conversation on not just consent in itself, I believe, but also who has the power who has the power to consent. And there's so much to think and talk about this book, this volume, but I I ran out of my capacity here, honestly, and it's going to be a lot of work, but I do want to read all the published volumes. And if you have read this volume or any other, let me know your thoughts. Thank you. It will be, and please consider supporting, subscribing, and liking this video if you liked it.